truly, Mrs. George Donner. The following extract is part of a letter which appeared in the Springfield Journal of July 30, 1846. South Fork of the Nebraska, 10 miles from the crossing. Tuesday, June 16, 1846. Dear friend, today at nooning there passed, going to the States, 7 men from Oregon who went out last year. One of them was well acquainted with Messrs. Ide and Cadden Keyes, the latter of whom, he said, went to California. They met the advance Oregon caravan about 150 miles west of Fort Laramie, and counted in all, for Oregon and California, excepting ours, 478 wagons. There are in our company over 40 wagons, making 518 in all, and there are said to be yet 20 behind. Tomorrow we cross the river, and by reckoning will be over 200 miles from Fort Laramie, where we intend to stop and repair our wagon wheels. They are nearly all loose, and I am afraid we will have to stop sooner, if there can be found wood suitable to heat the tires. There is no wood here, and our women and children are out now gathering buffalo chips to burn, in order to do the cooking. These chips burn well. Mrs. George Donner. On the 18th of June, Captain Russell, who had been stricken with bilious fever, resigned his office of leader. My father and other subordinate officers also resigned their positions. The assembly tendered the retiring officials a vote of thanks for faithful service, and by common consent, ex-Governor Boggs moved at the head of the train and gave it his name. We had expected to push on to Fort Laramie without stopping elsewhere, but when we reached Fort Bernard, a small fur trading post 10 miles east of Fort Laramie, we learned that the Sioux Indians were gathering on Laramie Plain, preparing for war with the Crows and their allies, the Snakes. Also that the immigrants already encamped there found pasturage very short. Consequently, our train halted at this more advantageous point, where our cattle could be sent in charge of herders to browse along the Platte River, and where the necessary materials could be obtained to repair the great damage which had been done to our wagon wheels by the intense heat of the preceding weeks. Meanwhile, Messrs. Russell and Bryant, with 6 young bachelor friends, found an opportunity to finish their journey with pack animals. They exchanged with traders from New Mexico their wagons and teams for the requisite number of saddle horses, mules, pack saddles, and other equipment, which would enable them to reach California a month earlier than by wagon route. Both parties broke camp at the same hour on the last day of June, they taking the bridle trail to the right, and we turning to the left across the ridge to Fort Laramie. Not an immigrant tent was to be seen as we approached the fort, but the bands of horses were grazing on the plain, and Indians smeared with war paint and armed with hunting knives, tomahawks, bows and arrows were moving about excitedly. They did not appear to notice us as we drove to the entrance of the strongly fortified walls surrounding the buildings of the American Fur Company, yet by the time we were ready to depart, large crowds were standing close to our wagons to receive the presents which our people had to distribute among them. Many of the squaws and papooses were gorgeous in white doe skin suits, gaudily trimmed with beads and bows of bright ribbons. They formed a striking contrast to us, travel-stained wayfarers in linsey dresses and sunbonnets. Most of the white men connected with the fort had taken Indian wives, and many little children played around their doors. Mr. Bordeaux, the general manager at the fort, explained to us that the immigrants who had remained there up to the previous Saturday were on that day advised by several of the Sioux chiefs, for whom he acted as spokesman, to resume their journey before the coming Tuesday, and to unite in strong companies, because their people were in large force in the hills, preparing to go out on the warpath in the country through which the travelers had yet to pass; that they were not pleased with the whites, that many of their warriors were cross and sulky in anticipation of the work before them, and that any white persons found outside the fort upon their arrival might be subject to robbery and other bad treatment. This advice of the chiefs had awakened such fear in the travelers that every campfire was deserted before sunrise the ensuing morning. We, in turn, were filled with apprehension, and immediately hurried onward in the ruts made by the fleeing wagons of the previous day. Before we got out of the country of the Sioux, we were overtaken by about 300 mounted warriors. They came in stately procession, two abreast, rode on in advance of our train, halted, and opened ranks; and as our wagons passed between their lines, the warriors took from beneath their teeth green twigs and tossed them toward us in a pledge of friendship, then turned, and as quietly and solemnly as they had rode to us, rode toward the hills. A great sigh of relief expressed the company's satisfaction at being again alone. Still no one could feel sure that we should escape a night attack. Our trail led up into the hills, and we traveled late into the night, and were again on the way by morning starlight. We heard wolf yelps and owl hoots in the distance, but were not approached by prowlers of any kind. Chapter 4